Is Dana White stiffing Wonderboy Thompson by not paying him his show money for the Pereira fight? Knuckleheads, this is something I want to discuss with you guys as a promoter and as an attorney who understands contracts. And, I especially wanted to talk about this because somebody actually reached out to me personally, one of my friends, to see what I thought of the situation. I think the situation is not so black and white. I think it's gray, but I think there are things about it that are black and white. And I hope that this video can help you understand and develop a better perspective. So first and foremost, in the fight game, especially kickboxing, MMA, there's show money and then there's win money. What does that mean? That means you get a certain amount to show up and actually compete. And then you get paid more if you win as a bonus. That's typically how it works in MMA, kickboxing. It sounds like that's how it works in the UFC, right? They were talking about show money. Dana White keeps saying show money when he's talking about Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And I guess the show money in his case was $250,000. And of course, that's a big payday, and I'm sure he's not happy to miss out on that. But the thing is, right, as the promoter and in the contract, and man, in places like California, there's a standard contract, and you can't even create your own. That's it. You use the state's contract. And in that contract, it says that you get paid as long as this fight actually goes through and happens, right? Because you can't hold someone liable for something that's out of their hands. If Pereira misses weight, that's nothing to do with Dana White. If Stephen Wonderboy Thompson breaks his toe, that's nothing to do with Dana White. So that's the way those contracts work, right? You get paid to show up and you get paid to win. And here's the thing. As the promoter, right, you're putting this contract together and you're paying this fighter, who's an independent contractor, to show up and to compete. That's the service that you're paying for. You're paying for the fighter to show up and to compete. You're paying both guys to show up and to compete. And so if one of them can't show up, are you obligated still to pay him for a service that wasn't completed? I mean, imagine you hired a painter, right? This might not be the best analogy, but imagine you hired a painter, for example, and he went and he got all the paint and he got all ready, and then his car crashed and he didn't show up, but it's not his fault because somebody ran into him, right? Do you still pay the painter for painting your house even though he didn't paint your house? It's the same thing. You're paying for a service that didn't happen. The only difference here is that people are very, emotional about the fact that a fighter spent all this time and money on his training camp. And people are also very emotional because, for whatever reason, and I think it's a horrible thing, the culture in our society has been, rich guy bad. Promoter must be rich guy and rich guy must be bad. And I just want you guys to imagine the culture that's created, right? If you force a Dana White to pay for a service that didn't happen, right? Fine, maybe Dana White and the UFC, multi-billion-dollar company, can afford it. But what happens to the regional promoters? What happens to the local promoters? What happens to the amateur promoters? What happens to those promoters in a situation where fighters don't show up and are falling out all the time? And now they're forced, for example, on a main event, to still pay the purse of the fighter that did show up and wasn't overweight. And now they're also forced to refund tickets. Now at this point, you're talking about something that's contractually wrong. All right. First and foremost, you got no leg to stand on legally if you're one of the fighters because, you were supposed to be paid to show up and fight and you didn't. But imagine what this would do to the business. I mean, do you want to see the promotions just get completely wiped out? I think if you do, then you force them to pay purses even when the other fighters don't show up. And listen, I'll speak from experience. Our last card, we had something like 15 or more pullouts through the course of the matchmaking process. Could you imagine having to pay 15 or more purses for fights that didn't happen? Again, you're talking about bankruptcy, you're talking about insolvency, you're talking about the end of the sport. And so, that's why I think that in a situation like this, Dana's completely justified in not paying the money. What he does try to do, and I think it's honorable if he's really trying to do it, is turn the guy around and get him another opponent. Now, in this situation, right, if he got Wonderboy Thompson another opponent and he refused that opponent, then he definitely shouldn't be paid. This is purely ethical at this point, right? Dana can pay if he wants to pay. And listen, he's got so much money and the UFC's got so much money, maybe they can. But you also have to think about it. If they do it for him, they're going to have to do it for everyone else. And what kind of culture does that create when you're paying fighters that show up, excuse me, despite the fact that their opponent didn't? I mean, so many fights fall off. So many injuries happen. And that would just be a recipe for disaster for absolutely everyone. And then, you'd probably have a lot of shady stuff going on if that wasn't, to be enforced on all promoters, right? Where fighters would probably agree to fight each other and then one of them would just pull out and leave the promoter holding the bag. So I don't agree. I don't agree with all the criticism being lodged at Dana White. I think if it's a situation where he can turn Wonderboy Thompson around and get him a fight soon, hey, no harm, no foul. That's what he should do. I think it's a situation. If it's a situation where they can't find him an opponent, well, at least maybe cover his training camp. But to sit there and pay him $250,000 for not fighting, and then let's say they find him a backup and he doesn't want it, and he just ends up not fighting and still making $250,000, that doesn't make sense to me. Knuckleheads, tell me what you think in the comment section below, and if you want further information, I can provide it. But yeah, I mean, the contracts, at least the ones we deal with in California, which is there's only one standard contract and you can't create your own, and it says what it says. It says if you don't show up to the fight and that fight doesn't go through, the promoter doesn't have to pay, and I think that's correct. Tell me what you guys think.